Hey guys, what's up? It's me, MC Matador here, and today I'm bringing you part 8 of my top 100 coaster countdown, Calamity. Now, I will apologize for the delay in uploading as of late because as these people should be familiar with, I'm currently in my first semester at university, and this past couple weeks I've had, 2 exams. I got another one coming up next week. I got my first 4-page paper due, just today actually. And I've had to spend a lot of time working on like 2 or 3 homework assignments per class per week. So it's been a little crazy because now that I think this is week 6. I'm just through about week 6 of 15 for school this semester. So it's a little busy. And I'm starting to understand how people constantly complain or constantly try and ask for sympathy for college life. I'm not breaking down yet, but it's definitely a lot of work, more than I ever had when I was starting the channel out in high school. So uploads might be a bit more stagnated. So let's just move on with this right now. This will be coasters number 45 through 31 on the list. Keep in mind that this list is only from the winter of 2018, so it will not include any of the 20 plus coasters I rode in 2019, as you probably should be familiar with if you've watched any of the previous parts. Moving swiftly onward, we'll have number 45, Batman the Dark Knight at Six Flags New England. This one definitely impressed me more when I went for a re-ride. The star of the show in 2016 was a coaster in the same park in Wicked Cyclone, especially since it was one of only 3 RMCs I'd ridden at the time. Now that I've ridden plenty more, you'll see how that one stacks up. It definitely built upon its favorability with a re-ride. I found it incredibly average for a steel looping coaster from any manufacturer for my first ride, but riding it 2 or 3 times during a very dead day in 2018 definitely gave me a much more favorable lasting impression. It's basically their Batman the Ride invert substitute, since I already had Mind Eraser. This thing definitely has a compact, albeit kind of forceless layout for the compactness. There's some kind of fun moments though. The 0G roll is pretty nice. The dive loop is excellent. It's just a fun ride overall, and I'd love to have a thing like this at my home park. It's definitely more unique than a Batman invert, but as you'll see, from numbers 44 to number 40, the Batman the Ride inverts, I think, just slightly edge it out for the intensity. It's a really good clone. I think that just the intensity alone makes it. I do still have the same hierarchy from last year, except for one new addition, Six Flags Magic Mountain's Batman the Ride, which is right in the middle. I still think that Fiesta Texas has the best Batman clone, although if I re-ride it, I'm sure it'll fall. My favorite that I've ridden in the past 2 years, or actually probably if I were to ever re-ride it, would be Great America's. Great America's has fantastic terrain interaction. It runs super well, consistently. I like that it has some theming as well. The rest of them just don't really have as much terrain interaction. St. Louis is a little jerky, but it might be because I was unfamiliar with the layout, because the St. Louis one, and the Fiesta Texas one are mirrored, but St. Louis did it worse than Fiesta Texas for a mirrored Batman layout. I also do want to say that Goliath at Fiesta Texas is the newest of these Batman inverts as well. It was built in 2004 for the then Six Flags New Orleans, and was relocated in 2008 as Goliath because they were able to salvage the ride. And these things have gotten a net gain of +4. If you watch last episode, you'll see a lot of the former Titans in the 20s and 30s have fallen because I've realized they just are more mediocre as my tastes and preferences have changed, as well as years of not being able to ride them again. And you don't have any improvements, and the competition improves around you, you're going to take a loss. And these Batman clones, with frequent re-rides, I think these are a really solid bunch, and I look forward to riding some more in the future, like the ones at, say, Six Flags Great Adventure or Six Flags Over Texas. Moving on, we have Superman, Escape from Krypton, a new challenger. I was told by my younger brother, who had been to Magic Mountain years before I even went. Granted, he was a naive 12-year-old, budding coaster fan. Not an enthusiast, but a fan. And he told me that it was one of the best coasters he ever ridden. And that really ramped me up. I think another thing that also really killed the hype for this is that I actually was able to ride Top Thrill Dragster the year before I rode this. And this being another in quotation marks, strata coaster, technically the first in America, but not really because it doesn't consistently reach 400 feet. It just was the perfect storm for extreme underwhelming disappointment. The culprits are the same as the rest of us. A very long queue, also not properly ventilated in the California heat, despite the queue also kind of like being in ice. There's no flash pass line either, so it's a little difficult dealing with that. The launch is probably the weakest launch I've ever felt on a coaster. It's even weaker than some launches on family coasters like Backlot Stunt Coaster and Fire Chaser Express. Oops, sorry, I spoiled that one because I rode Fire Chaser Express this year, but I said it for enunciation. For a ride that goes over 100 miles an hour, the launch makes it only feels like it goes a lot slower than that. And some of the accelerators, like Accelerator at the neighboring park, you'll see that one later on, those only go 70, 80 miles an hour. I think Accelerator goes 0 to 82 in a fraction of the time, but feels significantly faster than this thing. This thing is just inconsistent, loud, weak, forceless, and just frustrating. And yes, well, when I say loud, I mean loud. If you thought things like Steel Vengeance's Lift Chain or Raptor's Roar on the Cedar Point Midway were bad, you have not heard an entire thing. You have not heard anything. You are listening to whispering in the shadows compared to this thing. It sounds like a jet engine taking off, resonating through the entire right half of the park. From Riddler's Revenge to Full Throttle to Twisted Colossus, you can hear the thing all the way over from Gold Rusher, Ninja, Revolution. Assuming it's running. It wasn't running first thing in the morning because I didn't start hearing it till midday in all of its sonic booming glory. It just was disappointing, but I still have to give it credit. It was really interesting going up a over 300 foot tall spike, essentially, backwards, and then falling back to earth and hitting brakes. It was a fun ride, but it's definitely more of a gimmick than actual quality. And rides like Top Thrill Dragster are a gimmick with quality, so this thing just kind of is a fail in my book. Moving on, we have Scream at the same park. This thing I think is actually pretty underrated. It gets a little too much hate for what it's worth. I mean, I can imagine that Bizarro at Great Adventure would be better with the exact same layout, if not mirrored layout. And this coaster's literally built over a chunk of parking lot. They haven't even bothered to give it different asphalt. I have to look past those things because the ride is pretty boring otherwise, but the actual experience when you're sitting on in the train is fun, forceful, surprisingly smooth, smoother than even some Batman inverts, and honestly, dead. Not dead in a bad way, but dead as in I was literally able to walk on to any row when I got my only ride on this thing. I'm pretty sure besides my party of 4, there were only about a partial of 2 other rows, the second in the back, filled up by other guests. Meanwhile, the neighbor doing Twisted Colossus had a well over half an hour, 45-minute line. It receives too much crap for its shortcomings, but I think it's still very solid, and I quite enjoy riding this thing. I would love to have a thing like this at my home park compared to some of the clones. This is a good clone, and it's very massive for being a clone. If Magic Mountain doesn't want it, I'll trade you Superman. I'll trade you Superman for it. I'll trade you Demon for it. You don't have an Arrow Looper. I'll happily take this off your hands here in Great America. It's a good ride. Until I get sick of it. Moving on, we have Kumba. Yeah, despite this thing getting a net gain, mostly due to the competition around it being deemed inferior, this ride is simply overrated. And the intensity is definitely above average, and the rule of B&M intensity is that the older the better. The 1994 B&M profiling, as well as the B&M intensity, really shows. This thing can often be kind of a banger at times, but not in a good way, like an actual head banger. And it makes some of their older coasters comparable. I think I found Georgia Scorcher to have less headbanging than this. That ride was built 5 years later, but it's a stand-up coaster. It's a lowly stand-up coaster. It looks fantastic. This thing is beautiful. You can hear it in the entire back of the park. It is in a dead end, I will say. You have to go into a dead end across wooden bridge in order to get over there, right? But, right, I think it's that area of the park is now more lively because Tigress is over there instead of the dead, rotting water ride that used to be there. And I think it's really the only thing within that area other than like a tiger exhibit. Either way, I think it's a very good looking ride. It rides very nicely, but it's just overrated. And it definitely shows. I mean, I can't really say much else than that. It's got incredibly high highs, but quite low lows. But all in all, it's still good and better than most of the B&M looping coasters I've ridden. Moving on, we have Superman Krypton Coaster, the better sit-down floorless thing, despite it taking a net loss of -2. I really need a re-ride on this. I keep saying this about San Antonio. It's one of my favorite cities in the United States that I've visited, and I really need a re-ride on everything at Fiesta Texas, including the 2 new coasters I've gotten since. The first ever 4D free spin, and the first ever RMC Raptor. But with my 2 rides on this in 2014, I remember being colored impressed, and my tastes have changed. And as the tastes and the competition have gone higher, this thing's just gone lower, especially with the lapses in memory. I remember more vividly Iron Rattler and my disdain for Poltergeist because I was a 13-year-old scared of launch coasters. I have to ride Poltergeist again because I'm no longer that. But this kind of got lost in the shuffle. And I do think this ride is absolutely gorgeous. Just red and blue, twisting track, classic color combination over the vast blue skies and the Texas quarry walls. Though that's actually just the park and it has nothing to do with Texas other than the location. This thing is gorgeous. And especially with the clearing on the Boardwalk Wonder Woman area, you get some really good views that you weren't able to before with the back part of the ride. So, this is definitely on the must-re-ride list. I hope it maintains the reputation it did. That vertical loop is also amazing. Super intense and super big. It's absolutely massive. Moving on, we have number 35, Fahrenheit. This thing, because just like Superman Krypton Coaster and a couple others in the list, like Daredevil Dive, Mr. Freeze Reverse Blast, this thing has gotten... I do remember it better than Krypton Coaster and a couple of the other things in the same boat as it because it was a fantastic ride. But obviously the competition has gotten better and this thing has not had a chance to prove itself again. And when I rode this thing, they still had the hard over-the-shoulder restraints. 2 years after I went, they got the soft over-the-shoulder restraints, as well as its sister coaster, neighboring actually, Storm Runner, the Intimate Accelerator. And this thing is got some really good stuff. The vertical lift hill, beyond vertical drop, one of the only Norwegian loops, if not the only, in the States. The pretty nice Cobra roll, and this thing's even undergoing a paint job as I speak. So this thing is really doing well. I think this thing's got a lot to look forward to, and I hope it continues to be a really good ride. I will say that there were some issues with it when I rode. The corkscrews were a little whippy, and with the hard over-the-shoulder restraints, it wasn't all that pleasant. The operations are kind of bad because it's only 12 people per train. They can run 3 trains, and they typically have 2 stacked before they send up the next one or something like that. I mean, this was like this was 2 days of visits in 2015, so my testimony is kind of dated. Moving on, we have Goliath at Six Flags Magic Mountain. This is actually, I think, the 4th coaster this episode from California, or from Magic Mountain alone. At least the 3rd. And I think this thing is still extremely solid. This thing, it's a weak hyper in comparison, especially with some of the B&M giants out there. Like B&M Hypers, B&M Gigas, and those overall just completely trump this thing. But this thing is absolutely solid in its own regard, truly solidifying the mantra that you can never go wrong with a hypercoaster from any manufacturer. And for what it offers, it has good speed, has a single pretty decent floater airtime hill, very non-restrictive restraints. It's plastered in ads, but that's not my problem. And the helixes. Oh, those helixes. I don't often gray out on helix type things. I didn't gray out on Goliath over Georgia's helix, but I was actually surprised when I was graying out pretty hard on those helixes. One of the biggest things, though, is that this thing has the single most buzzkill mid-course brake run. It functionally is just an actual brake run. It slows you to a crawl, almost a complete stop, before you dip into the second half of the ride. And, I mean, I can kind of justify it, because if this thing only slowed halfway down from the mid-course brake run, unexperienced guests would probably black out in those helixes in the back half. And Six Flags doesn't want to take that risk, being Six Flags. It's understandable, but kind of sad at the same time. But for what it's worth, this thing is an excellent attraction that I would happily ride every time I go to Six Flags Magic Mountain, even if I was a regular. Moving on, we have Lightning Racer, a +7 gainer from 2016, only falling one spot on a list that has over 30 more entrants. Yeah, this thing's been doing pretty well for itself. I haven't been on either circuit, just like everything at Hershey Park, considering that Philadelphia is 16 hours away from me, since 2015, as I've been stated with Fahrenheit and the likes. And GCI has been a manufacturer that I've fallen more and more in love with as I ride their Mastercraft between 2016 and 2018, considering that my first ever GCI was Roar, followed by American Thunder, which you saw earlier on, followed by Wildcat. You can color me impressed when I got off this thing actually thinking it was good. And then every GCI I've ridden ever since, things you'll see later on the list. The California GCIs like Ghost Rider and Apocalypse, the GCIs I rode in 2019 like Thunderhead, and another thing you'll see much later on in Renegade. Those have all been impressive, and you haven't seen any of the GCIs other than this on the list, and this thing has started it all. And I really want to ride this thing, get ride at both circuits, just overall have a good time. I've heard it's been getting a little rougher as time's passed, but that won't stop me from riding it. I sometimes rewrite SLCs because I'm just morbid curiosity. And Candemonium, it's starting to ascend. The steel is being put into place, so a trip to Chocolate Town might be in the books in the near future. This is one of those parks, if not Six Flags Fiesta Texas, is the one I'd love to visit again the most. Moving on, we have Superman Ride of Steel at Six Flags America. Yeah, this thing is not as impressive as time has passed. That layout, though, is oof. It's a drop, airtime hill, helix, double helix, straight section, airtime hill, straight section, double helix, and then a small airtime buffet, floater buffet. And I don't really have the best reputation with Intamin Hypers either. Intamin Hypers, as you'll see, I haven't gotten to the other two Intamin Hypers I've read on the list, but you'll see what happens next episode, because this part's almost over with one more guest at the end. And I do think this is still one of the weaker Hypers, ever, especially in the Intamin standard. And I think this thing offers less than any B&M Hyper ever, and even the ones that are still being built. Haven't ridden this thing in 5 years, and I have a sneaking suspicion that my reride would disappoint me more with the ever-increasing competition that I have ridden since. I was not even close to 100 coasters in 2014 when I rode this thing for the first time, with dreadful operations and all. And now hitting 100 coasters 2 years later, hitting 152 years after that, and now currently standing at 183 in a year after that. This thing definitely has a lot to make up for if I were to reride it after 5 years of dormancy. Bring it on, Six Flags America. And finally, we have Cheetah Hunt to finish off Part 8. A long ride, very diverse elements, and overall extremely enjoyable from ages 6 to 60. Or maybe slightly more dense than that. Not sure if a 6-year-old can get on this thing most of the time. Like 8 to 80 almost, if Grandpa does not have fibromyalgia or whatever. And it definitely is a very long ride, very unique elements, airtime, inversions, S-bends, laterals, height, speed, launches, it has it all. But it just doesn't have the oomph of other Intamin coasters, if not just other much larger coasters even in the same park. It doesn't pack force, and why this thing uses the hard over-the-shoulder restraints still as well baffles me. I get that having lap bars with the Florida General Public going through a Heartline roll would be a bad idea, Why they put comfort collars on tigers, unfortunately. But why the hard ones? Just swap them out for the soft ones. It isn't that hard. Other than the restraints, I think the main issue with it is that it's a good ride that just doesn't bring enough oomph to the table. And it definitely is a step up from things in the same park that you've seen earlier, like Sand Serpent, Scorpion, and Cobra's Curse. But, much like you'll see with the rest of Busch Gardens Tampa's lineup, coming up in the final 2 episodes, it doesn't deliver like those big boys, as well as the rest of my top 30. So, that wraps up my top 100 top 150 coaster countdown, Calamity Part 8. We only have 2 more parts to go before this series is in the books. And I'm almost certain that unless there's a major crisis in my life, that I can get this done before the end of October. So, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Feel free to leave a like, comment, or subscription. Let me know if you're excited for the finale of the series to see what has entered my top 15, top 10, what my favorite coaster of all time is. There's some drama going around if you are that invested into it. If you've made it this far, you're obviously invested, so congratulations. I hope you guys have a great Insert Unit time here. Good luck with school. I'm sure the majority of y'all are a month in. So, keep going. You're doing well, I can imagine. And, as always, I wish you guys peace.